Thanks. There we go. Thanks, Nikki. And good morning, everybody. And appreciation to the Madison Art Society. They really are a great organization, as all of you know, as members and then participants who take advantage of art lectures, demos, and presentations. So I certainly appreciate the opportunity to get back together on Zoom. And today we're going to explore the New West in paintings by Georgia O'Keeffe, Ansel Adams, photographs, Richard Diebenkorn, and Ed Ruscha, modern paintings. And just be sure the sound is turned up on whatever device you are using, even though we have you muted right now. But want to make sure, as Nikki mentioned, we do have some very nice videos, and I want to make sure you can hear them. The American West always inspired American artists with its vast landscapes of natural beauty. I'd like to begin with two artists first from the 19th century, two artists who ventured west with their paintbrushes, paints, and canvases. There you go. All right, hold on one second. It's not so easy to get the wagon train started in the 19th century. Let's just get there. We go. Few painters have created more dramatic, lavish, sweeping landscapes of the American West than Albert Bierstadt. He was born in Germany in 1830 and was brought to America by his parents to live in New Bedford, Massachusetts. After painting with artists in New England and upstate New York, known as the Hudson River School of Painters,
from the window,
he boldly heads west. In 1859, joining a land surveyor from the U.S. government. Here he would discover a magnificent New Eden, a New Eden as he paints in this 1865 panorama looking down Yosemite Valley. These artists were also known as the Luminists. How they would capture atmosphere and light, not just the landscape, and this new world that few had really seen other than Native Americans and French fur trappers. Bierstadt would statically describe this new frontier, saying, quote, truly, all is remarkable and a wellspring of amazement and wonder. Man is so fortunate to dwell in this American Garden of Eden. Albert Bierstadt. In the summer of 1873, at the age of 35, artist Thomas Moran goes west to join U.S. government surveyor John Wesley Powell on a trip to the Grand Canyon. He would return again and again to the Grand Canyon and other natural wonders in the Southwest, and his paintings would delight audiences back east, like this painting of Zion Valley, South Utah. Joining him on these painting adventures was a correspondent for the New York Times who wired vivid accounts of the adventure and hardships they all endured. In this photograph from the expedition, we see John Wesley Powell, the U.S. government land surveyor, on the right, Thomas Moran seated in the middle, and a young Indian child who joined them on the lower left. Thomas Moran's goal was to capture, as he would say, the true impression of the scene rather than a literal topographical view. He would declare, quote, I place no value upon literal transcripts from nature. My general scope is not realistic. All my tendencies are towards idealization. Topography in art is valueless. This painting from 1878, Green River, Wyoming, is another example of the mastery of painting light, painting atmosphere, as well as recording this magnificent landscape in the far horizon. But we see the figures crossing the Green River, the lead rider in the center of the river, testing depth. Is this the place to cross those that are following across the Green River? Now, in the 20th century, a painter from New York City go west and create a new vision of the American West. Her name was Georgia O'Keeffe. And she would create iconic paintings of the Southwest in and around her Taos, New Mexico studio. Georgia O'Keeffe would say about why she became a painter, I found I could say things with color and shape that I couldn't say any other way. Her flower paintings were viewed by many as erotic visual metaphors. George O'Keeffe would deny this. She would say, quote, I just like to paint flowers, and does it magnificently. In 2014, her painting of Jimson weed white flower sold for $44,405,000 at Sotheby's American Art Sale. It was purchased by Walmart heiress Alice B. Walton to be displayed at her Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas. At that time, it was the most expensive work of art ever painted by a woman, and one of the most expensive works of American art ever sold. George O'Keeffe was born in 1887 in the town of Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, and has been recognized as the mother of American modernism. In her early years, she studied in many art schools around the country, including the Arts Institute of Chicago and the Art Students League of New York. But she often felt constrained by her lessons that focused on literally recreating or copying what was in nature. In 1950, she was 28. She would embrace something radically new, abstract art. These are examples of her drawings at this time, which George O'Keeffe called dream drawings from her subconscious. Alfred Stieglitz, an art dealer and photographer in New York, discovered her work in 1960 and included examples at his 291 gallery on Lower Fifth Avenue. But he exhibited them without George O'Keeffe's permission. Stieglitz's 291 gallery was introducing modern art for the first time to America. In his gallery, he showed works by Matisse, Rodin, Cezanne, and the first showing in America of a radical Spanish artist working in Paris, Pablo Picasso. This is a view of Stieglitz and the 291 gallery. Soon after, George O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz would begin a passionate love affair and eventually marry. She would be his muse. And for the next 30 years, they would be devoted to each other. with George O'Keeffe traveling back and forth between New Mexico and New York. In 1946, after Stieglitz's death, George O'Keeffe would live permanently in New Mexico, creating landscapes that would continue the legacy of American Western artists, but with a new vision and color, composition, and imagination. O'Keeffe would call her forays into the transcendent desert landscapes, quote, the far away. Her painting, Black Mesa Landscape, done in 1930 in New Mexico, shows the red rocks of this far away. Let's look at this short video on the red rocks from CBS Sunday Morning.
We leave you this Sunday morning back among the red rocks of O'Keeffe country.
Sometimes George O'Keeffe would make found objects from the desert floor the focus of her paintings, especially animal skulls. In her iconic painting, Ram's Head White Hollyhock and Little Hills, painted in 1935. O'Keeffe combines realism with surrealism. A floating ram's head with a flower mysteriously appearing, all composed against a billowing sky, clouds, above a range of distant red mountains. She continues to explore this visual theme, a single skull, highlighting its jagged edges, worn surfaces, and bleached color with red, white, and blue. To O'Keeffe, such bones represented the desert's enduring beauty and the strength of the American spirit, which is alluded to in the red, white, and blue background on this cow's skull head, painted in 1931 in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. George O'Keeffe would live and paint permanently in New Mexico until her death in 1986. Let's listen to George O'Keeffe talk about painting in the Southwest.
The first year I was out here, because there were no flowers, I began picking up bones. Well, I wanted to take something home. I wanted to take something home to work on. I had a whole pile in the patio there. I wasn't painting them right then, but I had to get them first. And when it was time to go home, I felt I hadn't started on the country. And I wondered what I could take home that I could continue what I felt about the country. And I couldn't think of anything to take home but a barrel of bones. So when I got home with my barrel of bones to Lake George, I stayed up there quite a while that fall and painted. That's where I began, that's where I painted my first skulls, from this barrel of bone. And first I painted a horse's head. And then I got this cow's head. And I had the cow's head painted against the blue. And I thought, well, I have to do something else about that. And that was at the time that the men were all talking about the great American novel, the great American play, the great American, oh, it was the great American everything. And I thought they didn't know anything about America. A lot of them had never been across the Hudson. So I thought, I'll make my picture a red, white, and blue. I'll make it an American painting for these people that don't go across the Hudson. And this was my painting. I put a red stripe down each side. Entertained me, but I don't think anybody else caught on to it for quite a while. Another thing I collected was artificial flowers that they had in all the little country stores. Poor artificial flowers, but sometimes they were very pretty. The bones do not symbolize death to me. They are shapes that I enjoy. It never occurs to me that they have anything to do with death. They are very lively.
George O'Keeffe denies that it has anything to do with death. She does not associate it with death. For instance, that pelvis series of the bones she found on the desert, she holds them up and then sees the mountain through the hole in the bone, so that she goes through this into nature. You can take it as a symbol of a sort of concrete immortality in these things too, that they outlast death itself.
They please me. And I have enjoyed them very much in relation to the sky. And after a while I thought it's very easy to always be having a bone with a blue hole in it. I'd better make it another color. So I had a reddish bone with a yellow sky. That wasn't too bad either.
Where do you suppose you got the idea of being an artist?
I haven't the faintest idea. I often think about it and wonder, but I had it in my head when I was, well, I couldn't have been 12 when I had that idea.
You had what idea?
That I wanted to be a painter. I was going to be a painter. The first year.
As Georgia O'Keeffe was making her iconic paintings of the West, another artist would use his camera rather than paint canvas to create what are considered some of the most timeless and stunning images ever portrayed of the American West. In magnificent black and white photographs. His name was Ansel Adams. Ansel Adams was born in San Francisco in 1902, and one of his earliest memories at the age of 4 was of the smoke from the fires caused by the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. An aftershock of the earthquake tossed the 4-year-old into a garden wall, breaking and scarring his nose, which remained crooked all of his life. His father gave him his first camera, a Kodak Brownie box camera, which is basically a simple cardboard box with a simple lens and a roll of film inside. It cost $1. Eastman Kodak introduced the camera in 1900, and it would revolutionize photography, letting the masses take a snapshot. Ansel Adams would take his Brownie camera on his first trip to Yosemite National Park in 1916 when he was 14 years old. A little camera and a big trip would change his life. He would trade in his little Brownie camera and mount the Woody that he loved to drive, that carried all of his equipment, built a platform, taking his 8 by 10 format view camera, mounting it on top, and taking photographs that would change the art of photography in black and white landscapes. Yosemite would become a kind of mecca for Adams. He'd return in every season to photograph its majestic natural wonders, like this photograph of Yosemite's El Capitan. What makes Ansel Adams' photograph so stunning is the technical virtuosity he brings to composition, detail, exposure, and as important as what he sees and the photograph he exposes and takes is what happens in the darkroom, the printed photograph, as many of you who are black and white photographers will know. In his photographs, he captures the full range of darks and lights, blacks and grays and whites, and all the tonal values in between. In short, Ansel Adams' black and white photographs represent his complete mastery of the art of black and white photography. This is considered one of Ansel Adams' most famous photographs. It's called Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico. Photograph was taken in 1941. He was in New Mexico for a project by the Department of the Interior, and he photographs this scene of the moon rising above a modest village with snow-covered mountains in the background under a dominating transitional sky. The light on the crosses in the foreground was rapidly fading, Ansel Adams would say, when people would ask, how did you get this exposure? He'd go on to say, I couldn't find my exposure meter, but I remembered the luminescence of the moon, and I used it to calculate the proper exposure. Over nearly 40 years, Adams would make over 1,000 unique prints of his photograph of Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico, 16 by 20-inch formats. The total value of these original prints exceeds $25 million. A single print of Moonrise reached over $600,000 at Sotheby's way back in 2006. I want to show a little bit from this Ken Burns documentary on Ansel Adams, because what it reveals is not only Ansel Adams, the photographer, but as importantly, Ansel Adams and his impact as an environmentalist.
In many ways, the war was the defining moment of Adams' career and a watershed in the history of the environmental movement, as the forces unleashed in the post-war years threatened the wilderness as never before.
My best guess is it was, in fact, the interstate highway system in the car. That as long as part of the country was really hard to get to, people took wildness for granted. And it was at the moment when suddenly everything was going to be out there where you could touch it that people began to say, wait a minute, if you touch a butterfly's wings, you ruin it. And maybe some of these places are more like a butterfly. Maybe if we touch them, then the scales will come off and the glimmer will be gone and the sheen will fade. And people began to question, I think, in the 50s, whether ease of getting there was always a good thing.
In the years to come, Adams would redouble his efforts to make Americans understand why wilderness mattered. Lobbying Congress for stricter laws, formulating policy for the Sierra Club, and writing countless articles and letters.
I bet he wrote more letters to the editor than any sane person in American history. At least 5,000. And he really thought this was a tremendous way to influence things. And he would just sit there, he'd type every one of them himself, you know, sitting there at his little typewriter. But that's how he worked. He was passionately involved. He was one of the great activists. He came to be known as Mr. Sierra Club. But his real impact on the 20th century American environmental movement was the inspirational value of his work, not made for environmental purposes, but they became symbols of the American wilderness. And I think that, to me, that's how he really made a difference.
Every now and then, he wondered whether the creative fires that had inspired him in his youth had begun to fade, or whether he had said all he had to say in the field of photography. But there was little time for such thoughts now, and in 1952, he embarked upon a series of magazine and book projects in collaboration with his good friend Nancy Newhall, hoping to reach an even broader audience with his message.
Confined by our own artifice, borne up on vast abundance and colossal waste, restless and disconsolate, we course across this dwindling globe that once seemed infinite, seeking somewhere, in some last far place, our birthright. The wild majesty, beauty, and freedom through which for 1,000,000 years man grew. Nancy Newhall, 1959.
Of course, the most important thing they ever did together was This Is the American Earth, which was published the same year as Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. That was in many ways the single most important book that kicked off the kind of modern mass environmental movement. But Ansel's book was very, very influential in that process in the same year, and I think next to Silent Spring, maybe the seminal book.
3 years later, in 1963, Adams and Newhall would collaborate again on a vast retrospective exhibit of his work called The Eloquent Light that would consolidate his already considerable reputation and fame and mark the beginning of the end of the most fruitful part of his career.
At some point in the late 50s, the great creative urge began to dissipate. Certainly after the mid to late 50s, he made very few photographs of real consequence. Whether he felt he'd said it or done it, he continued to make photographs, but the drive was gone. He was 61 years old at the time of the exhibition, and many artists have much, much shorter periods of great productivity.
I think it probably has a lot to do with just plain stamina. I mean, just physical stamina. The ability to kind of stay with it and continue to worry it and to do it from the other side, to try and to keep confronting this suspicion that you haven't really understood it yet, that you haven't found the right place to stand, you haven't found where the edges of the picture are, you haven't found really what the components of the picture are yet. It gets easier to abandon it half done when you get older.
And he felt very guilty about it. I first came to know him in the 70s, early 70s, and he was 69, I think, and he was always saying, well, I've really got to get out and photograph. You could tell that he felt that they were going to take his union card away or something. He really, it was guilt. He was a big man for guilt, but it didn't make any difference. He just didn't do it. And when he went out, nothing happened.
If you look at the few late pictures he made late in his life, Moon and Half Dome, El Capitan Winter Sunrise, oh my gosh, those are 2 of his 12 best pictures. And he made them on the spur of the moment when he happened to be in Yosemite with a camera, which shows he could still do it. And so I am convinced that the reason he didn't was he was always worried about the wolf at the door and money.
He was nearing 70 when the financial security that had eluded him all his life materialized at last, in the form of an enterprising one-time graduate student in forestry named Bill Turnage, whom Adams had met in the spring of 1970 while lecturing at Yale. Taking over the management of Adams' affairs, Turnage swiftly turned the Ansel Adams archive into a multi-million-dollar business, and Adams himself into a popular icon and the first mass-marketed fine arts photographer in the world.
Ansel in his last years became cross between one's favorite uncle and Smokey the Bear. But that wasn't the real artist. I think that was somebody who had come to recognize that his best work as a photographer was behind him, and was proceeding to be an extraordinarily valuable member of society, as an educator, as a conservationist, as a spokesman for a lot of things that many of us regard as highly important. But that wasn't the greatest Ansel. In my view, the greatest Ansel was Ansel the artist, and that Ansel was operating at full steam for more than 20 years, which is very good for an artist.
The next 2 artists we'll be looking at have taken a very modern look at the American West, and their focus will be California and its urban landscapes. The artist Ed Ruscha would make art out of something as seemingly mundane as a roadside gas station along a western highway, a standard oil gas station. The artist Richard Diebenkorn would find a unique beauty and visual meaning in abstract meditations of color looking out his window at his Santa Monica neighborhoods and streets. In the late 1960s, Richard Diebenkorn, a painter in Santa Monica, California, created a series of tranquil, rich, and flowing color, abstract canvases that made his reputation and transfixed art lovers. This series of paintings were called the Ocean Park series, which Diebenkorn would begin painting in 1967, soon after moving from San Francisco to Southern California to accept a teaching position at UCLA. His friend and fellow painter, Sam Francis, invited him to take over his studio in Ocean Park, a working class neighborhood at that time in the southwest corner of Santa Monica. At that time, in the mid-1960s, Santa Monica, this area was a derelict area. It was filled with bars and rescue missions and low rents, which attract artists. These are 2 of the Ocean Park series. On the left, Ocean Park number 67, and on the right, an earlier Ocean Park number 24. So what's behind these paintings by Diebenkorn? Well, back in 1967, Diebenkorn's studio sat on a hillside where he looked out and chose to look up at the geometry of the hill and how the streets crossed one another. His 1969 oil painting, Ocean Park number 24, is now in the Yale University Art Gallery Museum. And it shows Main Street running through Ocean Park. The neighborhood he's living in Santa Monica. He's 2 blocks from the Pacific Ocean. But Richard Diebenkorn turns his gaze away from the ocean and up the hill. Today, the same Santa Monica neighborhood is filled with trendy shops, restaurants, and multi-million-dollar condominiums and bungalows. It may seem somewhat odd that the artist turned his back on the ocean and looked up the hill instead. But Diebenkorn was more interested in light and form and shape than he was in looking at water. His Ocean Park paintings would signal a dramatic shift from his earlier works. The paintings of Henri Matisse, as the one on the left, Red Room, Harmony in Red, done in 1908. Matisse had a profound influence on Diebenkorn. The influence was how Matisse used bold colors to block in major areas of the composition. His use of free-flowing painted line and shapes to detail the objects and the figure, and how Matisse flattens the overall perspective in the foreground while abstracting the landscape in the background seen through an open window. Diebenkorn's painting on the right borrows almost everything from Matisse's Red Room. On the left, almost everything except for the human figure. Richard Diebenkorn's 1975 work, Ocean Park number 79, is a gorgeous composition of color. It features pastel blues, lavenders, and aquas, and thin stripes of deep red and green at the top to draw the viewer's gaze upward. It's a big canvas, measures 7 by 8 feet. It's also full of little painterly moments and surprises. Diebenkorn leaves little drops of paint while applying the paint to the canvas. Diebenkorn named each piece in the series with a number in the order by which he made them. In 1985, Ocean Park number 137 arrived at New York's Knoedler Gallery, straight from Diebenkorn's Santa Monica studio. It was getting ready for one of Diebenkorn's regular solo exhibitions in New York. The New York Times art critic John Russell celebrated the Ocean Park series in what he described as, quote, the single longest continuous exploration of a given motif in the work of any substantial living American painter. 3 years later, in 1988, the painting was acquired by the actress Mary Tyler Moore and her husband, Dr. Robert Levine, who were 5 years into a loving marriage that lasted until her death at the age of 80. Recently, this painting, Ocean Park, number 137, measuring more than 8 feet in height, was sold for over $22 million at Christie's. Let's watch this short video where Richard Diebenkorn talks about his art.
I think what an artist does is all about his what's around him, what's his environment, cultural, physical, visual.
Wandering through the countryside in California's Sonoma County, he appears every bit the outdoorsman.
I used to think I was a really landscape artist, and I think I've revised that a little bit.
He is, in fact, a recent arrival from the big city who has come to this land of color and quiet to paint to paint the quiet, colorful works that have made him famous. He is Richard Diebenkorn, a master of contemporary American art.
I think it's hard for an artist to see himself, really. I'm aware of a predisposition to spareness or aloneness is something I value.
Where would you like to be right now?
Alone somewhere.
But here.
His sense of aloneness extends well beyond the canvas. In an age of publicity-hungry artists, Richard Diebenkorn has always felt uncomfortable in the spotlight.
And your paintings look beautiful.
Thanks very much.
It's really a pleasure to see them. I came down.
The solitude of the studio suits him well. For years, his working procedure has been the same: to sit and contemplate a canvas, sometimes for hours, before ever picking up a brush.
Usually pieces have to go through several sessions. I never seem to be able to get anything one shot right off. Sometimes I get sort of rooted to the chair, and then sometimes I think, well, you know, I just can't sit here. I've got to do something. So then I'll be really rather arbitrary.
Is that really the feeling? Do you feel like you're wasting time, or?
Sometimes, yeah.
Really?
Time's going by.
How would you describe it in its current state? Finished?
Yeah, I think possibly almost finished, but those are famous last words, almost finished, and I've said that about pieces and found myself still working on them a year later.
His work, nearly 50 years of it, includes early abstract paintings, a period during the 50s and 60s when he turned to landscape, to still life, the human figure. And in the last 25 years, the series of serene geometric abstracts that sealed his reputation, the Ocean Park series, named for the area in Santa Monica in Southern California, where his studio was. It was a place that inspired many of his greatest works, but the pressures of the Los Angeles area began to intrude too much on this most solitary of men.
In the last year, I felt that each time I went out in the car to West Los Angeles for errands or whatever, every trip I made, it was that much worse. I felt that I was more hemmed in, more closed in on, the traffic was heavier. That shows you something about how high the water was, but
And so it was that Diebenkorn came to the Russian River of Northern California, where his dogs, Amy and Lucy, can run free, and where the river itself attracts him again and again. Do you ever, seeing a scene like this, say, all right, now I'm just going to go back to representational painting one time just to get this?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Do you?
Yeah.
I mean, here?
I just thought, I was down here with Amy several days ago, and I thought, well, next time I come down, I'll bring sketch pad, and I'm going to draw that.
Did you do it?
And I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to. I guess in the 50s, when I was doing abstract painting, I thought, well, to do representational stuff was just beyond the pale when an artist with any seriousness or sensibility simply didn't do that. You know, it was a sort of mindset that, for a set of reasons, one had, and now I and most artists don't have that mindset. So that if you see something out there that turns you on, well, it's subject. Subject.
One measure of Diebenkorn's standing in the art world, this current display of his drawings at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Another, the recent sale of a Diebenkorn painting for $1.2 million, which puts him in a very select club of living American artists whose works command such prices. His friend and this exhibit's curator, John Elderfield.
For me, he's a very important artist. He manages both to be pioneering and to remind one in his work of the great masters of the past and to reinvent their message for new generations. A sort of reimagining of Matisse, of Cézanne, of even earlier artists who he admires very deeply.
It gets a bit more chaotic than this.
But after all the analysis, Richard Diebenkorn marvels, just like the rest of us, at the mystery of how art comes to be created. Each of his works a roadmap of its own making, with changes and second thoughts right there on the canvas for anyone to see.
There's a trial and error and a butting one's head against the wall. And I might say it's all right except for one little corner, and so I changed that little corner, and then that alters other parts, and pretty soon I'm back into it, and then maybe it changes completely.
The aim is not what we might call finish in a conventional way, because some of the works look unfinished, but rather having fought that fight to his satisfaction. And when he feels somehow that he's worked that out, then he can leave it alone.
Our last artist today of the New West chooses a sometimes dreamlike realism to express his view of Southern California and most notably Los Angeles. Ed Ruscha. He remains one of the most influential Los Angeles painters, printmakers, and photographers, developing a vibrant signature style of combining words and his visual metaphors. Just this past year, the Museum of Modern Art held a major retrospective of Ed Ruscha's work. His paintings combine words, images, and landscapes and objects in a variety of ways. The iconic Hollywood sign at sunset, a standard gas station. Sometimes his paintings are playful. And humorous. Sometimes slightly sinister. 90% angel, 10% devil. Ed Ruscha was first associated with pop art in the 1960s. Pop artists like Andy Warhol and his soup can. Comic book artists taking comic books and making them pop art, like Roy Lichtenstein. Ed Ruscha was trained as a commercial illustrator, and he had an early interest in comic books, graphic design, typography, and like pop artist Andy Warhol with his iconic Campbell soup can painting, Roy Lichtenstein's homage to comic book art, Ruscha also shared a love for words, combined with iconic images in flat graphic compositions, like his standard oil painting. He began experimenting with this subject in his first artist book, 26 Gasoline Stations from 1963, which reproduces a series of banal black and white photographs the artist took while driving on Route 66 between Los Angeles and his hometown in Oklahoma City. The book would go on to influence a generation of artists with its industrial style and casual, handmade look. That year, converting an otherwise ordinary locale into a dramatic, even mysterious symbol of the American vernacular landscape, Ruscha created a monumental 5-foot by 10-foot painting titled Standard Station, Amarillo, Texas, based on one of the photographs from his book. He radically foreshortens the composition. Ed Ruscha is to pop art in the West, as Andy Warhol was the king of pop art in New York. But where Warhol was considered by some a little bit bizarre, Ed Ruscha was considered very cool.
The artist's name is pronounced Edward Ruscha. He goes by Ed Ruscha. When he was a young, what you might call emerging artist, he actually had business cards printed with his name spelled out phonetically, Edward Ruscha, so that people would know exactly how to pronounce it. Ed Ruscha defies easy categorization as an artist. He is simultaneously known as a pop artist, a conceptual artist, a surrealist artist. In fact, he's probably all three. He was early identified with the West Coast pop movement. Ed was a member of the so-called cool school of art. A New York journalist once described Ed Ruscha as a triple threat artist, someone who was as adept at painting and photography as he was at printmaking. And in fact, the artist works in a variety of media over time: paintings, prints, drawings, photographs, and artist books. Most definitely, the two subjects most associated with Ed Ruscha are early subjects: the standard gasoline station and the iconic Hollywood sign. Ed Ruscha is probably best known as someone who uses words as subjects in his imagery. He says, "Some artists paint flowers, I paint words." Ed Ruscha has always been interested in words and letter forms. When he was in college, he worked as a printer's devil in a typography workshop, and then later on as a graphic designer. So words have always been a part of his thinking. He likes to record words in notebooks. These are words that he overhears in conversation, words that he sees in signs and billboards, words from musical lyrics that he hears in recordings or on the radio. He lists those words in pages of his notebook, and as he says, all those words have temperatures, and when they become really hot, that's when he decides to use them in his art. The writer J.G. Ballard once described Ed Ruscha as having the coolest gaze in America. And certainly there is a sense of cool detachment in a lot of the works. That might indicate an artist who has a very sort of cool personality, and he certainly is a cool guy. But there is probably no other artist alive in America today who is as beloved as Ed Ruscha. He's just an all-around nice guy. Ed Ruscha has a very dry, laconic sense of humor, and it comes through in so many of the works in this show. Every time I think about the exhibition, even when I was writing my essay for the exhibition catalog, there was always a smile on my face. And I challenge any viewer to go through that show and not break out in a smile.
Love that music. Ed Ruscha epitomizes the spirit and persona of Los Angeles and the West, combining the real and the imagined. His standard gas station series becomes a meditative, iconic image Monet painted his water lilies. Ed paints his gas stations, sometimes even on fire, combining words and imagery against the American landscape. Making us stop and think, what does it mean? At a street corner, could that be Hollywood and Vine? And sometimes a painting, what you see is, well, what you see, just cold beer. He continues to inspire artists today. And I think it'll be fun to close with just a little bit more about Ed Ruscha and some of the other artists admire him so much in a wonderful little video narrated by art lover Owen Wilson.
I'm going to play this tune called Good Night, My Love, and this kind of represents everything that I felt about California when I first came out here.
Good night, my love.
Ed Ruscha's been making work in Los Angeles for the better part of a century. People often talk about Ed's work, his paintings, his books, photos or films, as being about Los Angeles, California, or the West. When they talk about Ed, they describe him as cool. And yes, he's cool. And yeah, the places he paints or photographs are usually in Los Angeles. He's lived here for over 60 years, after all. I'm not going to try to explain Ed's work. We only have a few minutes here. But I am going to show you as much as I can. And there's a lot, so buckle up.
Ed, you know, what should people see? Maybe gas stations, maybe. They're streamlined. Everything about it is streamlined. That's what I like.
In the early 60s, Ed was making the 1,000-mile drive from Los Angeles to Oklahoma City a lot.
The thing I really noticed were gasoline stations.
So he took photos of them and published 26 of them in a little book.
Ed said to me at the time, it's a diary.
Sold the books at $3 a pop.
And I went home and thought about that.
When he ran out, he printed more.
It was kind of a punk move.
It looked like anybody could have done that if they had their eyes open.
One photo in particular stuck with Ed, a standard station outside Amarillo, Texas. He borrowed a composition from the movies. When the Lumiere brothers first showed this in 1896, audiences jumped out of their seats. Standard station's an image Ed revisited many times. Here it is on fire in 1966, burning in 68, with a 10-cent Western being torn in half. An olive. An olive?
Does that mean olive oil? Whatever the joke is, I love it.
Here's what the building looks like today. It's called K&T Automotive Transmission. He used this format on a few paintings from that time. Here's Norm's Diner, also on fire. They tried to tear the building down last year.
You know, architects are into it for what they can do with a space. I'm into it for something else. I'm still trying to understand what that is.
Apartment buildings caught Ed's attention next.
There weren't that many in Oklahoma at the time.
He started photographing them.
Gee, look at these apartment buildings are just totally square.
The buildings have a name.
Like it was a car.
And then the name is in a font.
He made another book, then started drawing some of these pictures.
It was like a nervous compulsion.
I remember growing up thinking how tacky they were, and now they look actually sort of quaint.
He used a motorized camera to shoot a long picture of the Sunset Strip. 2.5 miles became a book that folded out for 27 feet. 25 years later, Ed was still painting buildings. He called these 5 black and white ones his Blue Collar series. 10 years after that, when Ed was invited to represent the United States at the Venice Biennale, he updated those 5 with 5 new color ones.
He looks at them directly without any beauty or mystery, although the paintings are great to look at.
Yeah, they are great to look at. Maybe we should have started with the word paintings. Let's try that. Word paintings, Ed Ruscha. Go.
He's more interested in words than he is in architecture.
You know, it's where Ed started, after all. One-word knockout, straight out of school.
Prior to Ruscha, how many of you took the opportunity to consider the word oof?
Something about these felt inspired by his childhood love of comics. These early paintings got Ed his first big break. Walter Hopps included 3 of them in his breakthrough exhibition at the Pasadena Art Museum, and Ed was the youngest artist included. He also made the poster. In the next few years, he started tweaking his text,
claiming it, making it his word,
pulling it apart, first literally, then in his kerning. By the late 60s, Ed was making it look like his text was made of maple syrup, jelly, beans, water.
He had an enormous amount of skill for a young guy in terms of handling paint. And also, it's funny.
In the early 70s, Ed started painting with actual foods: chocolate, cilantro, ketchup, caviar, hot sauce.
Anything that he could use to leave his mark.
Here's Ed with some chewing tobacco.
I just picked tobacco just because of the marks it makes.
How can you get romantic about prune juice? You can taste it and see it, or see the stains. He likes the stains. Who would have ever done something like that? Ed Ruscha. That's what he'd do.
He started making drawings using gunpowder a few years prior, and made these prints out of squid ink, daffodils, and axle grease in '69.
How does the word jelly look with jelly? Try putting that in your hat before you have ever seen somebody else do it.
A few years later, he made a movie about a car mechanic that goes from grease-covered to pristine.
The movie that I was in is about a mechanic who forgets that he made a date with a girl. He starts out in a small, dirty little garage, ends up in a great big clean garage.
Words were all spoken in this one, save for this great-looking title.
I mean, sometimes when you finish a painting, you feel clean.
By the late 70s, he worked clouds into the background, and in '82, he standardized his type with a font he calls Boy Scout Utility Modern.
It looked like it was done by a lineman for the telephone company, and he's asked to make the poster for the annual picnic.
In the '80s, the phrases got longer. You could kind of make sense of little stories here and there.
You right away when you hear a phrase like that and you want to know, who is she and why did they call her Styrene?
'85 brought about the first of these city lights and the first appearance of censor strips, kind of like redacted government documents. In 1997, he started painting these majestic mountains. As much as I like Ed's words, and he's got a few, he's just as good without them. 1997, Picture Without Words. They've been making sketches of it for over 25 years, and you can kind of look at it forever.
It's a godlike painting.
So what's the secret? What makes Ed Ruscha keep painting every day over 50 years later?
I think he came from a different place. He had a different source, the direct source of reality. Like a person from another planet would come in here and see this stuff directly. That's it.
Ed Ruscha. Amen.
So there you have it, our trip out west. I hope you enjoyed it. And we have a few remaining minutes. Welcome your comments and questions, any observations, new discoveries. But before we jump to that, just a reminder, as Nikki said at the top, that we're going to get together on Wednesday, March the 6th at 11 a.m. And that's when we're going to look at what happens when pop goes to the portrait, and some artists who break and remake the rules of portrait arts. So I hope you'll join me for that. I know that Madison Art Society will send out more information on that. So a few questions perhaps, and don't be shy. And you can unmute yourself, I think, if you want. Shout out works just fine. I know we still have a few people here. I see up on the meter about 49 people. So out of that group, did you see someone that, Nikki, I'll ask you a question. Did you discover anyone, you're an artist, did you discover an artist or art or an approach that might have surprised you?
Yes, so a different approach in every one of the artists. most importantly for me, I did not realize that Ruscha had a book on the different gas stations. So I find that to be very interesting, and now I will go out and search for one. I also like the idea of the rolling camera that he used for the fold out book as well. You know, really interesting guy. I didn't know all of that about him, so that was wonderful.
He's pretty fascinating guy. I've seen some of the other folks that are here. I see Beverly, you were looking, it looked like quite intently watching it all. Anything that you saw or wanted to share?
I'm not, didn't do a lot of abstract work, so it was fascinating how they took the realistic things and the use of colors and lines and incorporating words. So I didn't know that much about Ed Ruscha, and so that was really exciting. Thanks so much for all your work.
Sure thing. Well, it's interesting to see this kind of continuing fascination with, and more importantly, inspiration of the subject, the American landscape, the American Western landscape. And I think one of the things about Diebenkorn, which I think is so interesting because we think of those Ocean Park geometric abstracts like we see here, but his early influences of abstract expressionism and his figurative work, and Matisse. There's a wonderful CBS Sunday Morning little short on Matisse and Diebenkorn and the kind of influence that Matisse had on Diebenkorn's work, which we might not immediately kind of associate when we look at his sort of geometric abstract paintings that Matisse was a profound influence on his work. Let's see who else I see Lorraine. I see you there, Lorraine. I don't see all the thumbnails because I haven't stopped sharing here. Maybe I'll do that and see who appears on this. Oh, there's everyone on the screen. Not to single anyone out, I just saw a name. But Lorraine, anything you saw that might have...
Yes, I was so interested in the abstract because I just got a book on abstract art, which is something very unfamiliar to me. I'm a representational painter. So seeing some of these really iconic pieces was very, very exciting. It's opening up my mind to new areas to
Oh,
explore.
that's great. That's a real compliment to the artists for sure. See who else has been looking. Ann Kelly, I see you looking there intently. Hi, Ann. If you want to add anything, please do. This is kind of open forum time. Everyone has an opportunity to...
I was first attracted to your talk because it mentioned Georgia O'Keeffe. And just last year, I was out at Ghost Ranch with my daughter and saw all the mountains and the hills that she painted. And that was a real thrill. So starting out with that today was a real treat for me. And I had Bierstadt, I have a print in my den of the work that you showed with the bear. So I thought, oh my gosh, I have that. The last two I never, ever heard of, and I will look into those. It's very, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Good. That's always fun when we discover some people that we like, wow, didn't know about them. And gee, they pretty influential individuals. Fun to hear them talk about their work particularly. Other folks. I see a few Yale Center for British Art fellow docents joined us today. If they have any comments, there we go. Unmute if you have something that you wanted to add. Unmute. Yeah, you can unmute, or we can unmute everybody if that's possible. Co-hosts. Jen, maybe not.
In a personal interview with Andrew Wyeth, the press asked him what kind of painter he is. and he indicated that he was an abstract painter. And he showed all the abstract pieces in his work, which led me to believe that sometimes we get too technical and too specific about what we see, and maybe present more of an abstract feeling to the landscape, and it would kind of work better. But I thought it was interesting that he described himself as that.
I've heard that quote too. I think that's a really interesting quote, particularly when we think of someone like Andrew Wyeth, you know, as the most representational. But I think as we do look at Andrew Wyeth's paintings, and I think I did a talk at the Madison Art Society, a Zoom talk on Wyeth, the three generations of Wyeth, NC, Andrew, Jamie. And as we kind of look at Wyeth paintings, we realize, gee, I can sort of understand that, yes, it's somewhat, well, very much representational, but his subjects and what he chooses. And as we go in and look at them, that's a good quote. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Other comments, anyone? I see Joan Bernard is joining us. Hi, Joan. Maybe off. I think everybody's been muted. I don't know if, Jen, you can unmute people, so it's just easy for them to shout out. I know I'm a co-host, but I don't quite know how to unmute everyone unless they unmute themselves. Mary, you just unmuted yourself. There you go.
I had heard of all three of the artists, everyone but Ed Ruscha, which, I mean, he's really interesting that he tried so many different things and mastered them. And I think with Georgia O'Keeffe is my favorite artist, and she has always inspired me. And I have several of her books, including the one that's in her own words. And I think one of the other things, I think there's also a quote from her about that a painting is only a great painting in an abstract sense. That somehow she was seeing the abstract of the composition when she did her painting, but I can't remember the exact quote.
Well, looking at those very early drawings, washes, and line that she sent actually to a friend of hers in New York who was a friend of Stieglitz, and so the friend takes it to Stieglitz, and Stieglitz is opening the first museum of modern art in America. And you look at those, and George O'Keeffe called them her sort of dream subconscious paintings. But in fact, if you put one of them next to one of her landscapes, you start to see, the line, shape, form, blocking those, and kind of taking that and really applying it to looking out at the southwestern landscape. So not surprising, such a leap at all, but seems to be a real understandable progression for sure. Other comments while we still are a few of us here. I always enjoy learning and listening to you. Joan, are you?
Well, I just really enjoyed the lecture and the combination of the videos and the conversations with the artists. Just a wonderful morning. Thank you.
Oh, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, Joan. Thanks for joining us. I know that runs a little longer with all the videos, but I didn't want to cut Ansel Adams short because I think many of us are familiar with his great photographs, but his environmental impact and what we kind of maybe take a little bit for granted, but that wasn't really a topic, until sort of the 60s and the early 70s when the environmental movement takes hold. And here you have Ansel Adams becoming, Mr. Sierra Club, and so I think looking at that and
No.
Yeah. Any other comments while we are still here? I see Annika, I see you joined us just because I know that name for a fellow docent. She might have stepped away. Last comments, anyone?
We don't know about the replay.
Last comment, am I on?
Oh, yes, Richard, go ahead.
I just put a link in the chat of a photo that I took from Ghost Ranch some years ago. It was a guided tour, and the guy held up images of George O'Keeffe paintings in front of the places where she was sitting and painting. And if you click the last link in the chat, you might see my snapshot.
Can we click that?
Yeah,
I'm
it's a link to a picture.
If you click it though, then you'll lose the.
No, you won't lose
No?
anything. A window will open in your browser.
Oh, okay.
Jen, can I do that, Jen, or can you do that?
I think
I was able to do it.
I don't know if it'll land in the screen that you're sharing. It won't land in your Zoom. It'll
Oh, I
land
see.
in your
Okay.
own browser.
So, Richard, can anybody click on the chat?
Yeah, they just have to.
Oh, good.
click or
Okay.
wake
I
up
have it.
the link.
I have it. It opens in
Excellent.
another window.
Yeah, that's what I
Excellent.
thought.
Yeah.
Oh, good,
Anyhow, so that's our guide. If you look closely, he's holding one of her pictures.
Excellent.
And right behind him is what she was looking at when she painted it. So they match. You can see the double spire there in real life, and it's the top edge of her image of her creation.
And I saw that on horseback.
That's
All
my
right.
contribution.
That's great. That's so nice to again see the artwork in context, to see
I've
that.
seen a place where George O'Keeffe painted. This is a tour guide.
They quoted her as saying about going out there to paint, to try to render what you see there. She says, yeah, you think it's easy till you try.
I think all the artists today could certainly applaud that comment for sure. I think one of the things I particularly liked, and that was an older video from back in the day of George O'Keeffe, but to hear her talk, bringing all those bones back to Lake George when she's going back and forth in the 30s. And I loved her comment about, all these men writing the great American novels, the great American plays, the great American this and that, and they haven't even been across the Hudson River.
Yeah, I like that too. That's great.
And I think that was just how delightful to hear that, but also to kind of again hear the artists talk, really about their work. Richard Diebenkorn and Ed Ruscha, and also the Ansel Adams. So these are fun for me. I get to go curate these. Thank you to you too, my best friend, because again, anytime that we can hear the artist talk about their work, I think is really a plus. They really know what they're talking about. So thank you all. Any other, Ionica, I see you there.
Yeah, no, I just made myself visible. And I want to thank you because, I was afraid I was going to be in Arizona, but here I am. And luckily, I was here to hear your lecture because I think that was wonderful. And it's also the idea that, that it's still true that a lot of people do not know the West. And I lived on the West Coast for 40 years in Oregon, and I know how much beauty there is, that people are just not aware of. Yeah. So, and even the artists are have been trying to tell that story, but it's still not there. It still needs more artists.
We always need more artists.
Yeah.
That is for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much.
So much,
Thank
Bob.
you.
Good. It's
Thank
great
you.
to thanks everyone. It's fun to have so many people get together and enjoy art. And indeed, we need more artists. So that's probably a good theme to close on. And since the sun has finally come out in Connecticut over the last few days, we'll go out and enjoy the landscape here and hope we can get out west and see more of that. So thanks everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Bob.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
I'll be sending out the invitation for the next lecture, hopefully this afternoon.
That's
Great.
great. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mary Ann and
Thank
Jen
you.
and
Thank you,
Nikki and
Bob.
everybody at
Bye.
the
Bye.
Madison Arts
See you
Society.
next
Bye-bye.
time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.